Number 10. Cyclops. While Cyclops might not be as powerful as some of the others on this list, he pretty much perfectly sums up the idea of a hero who has to hold back his power in order to fight. I mean, that's literally what his costume is for, really. Well, other than that sweet X-Men suit. That is just so we know what team he's fighting alongside. But when it comes to his visor, that is straight up being used to better control and restrain his powers, so that he isn't just optic blasting everyone he looks at or comes up against into next week. Additionally, Cyclops doesn't just use his visor, but also uses his gloves to do this. In his gloves are little buttons that Cyclops can basically push to control the visor, allowing him to open it more or less and change the angle at which it will emit his optic blasts. This is also why Cyclops is known as a master of trigonometry. He needs this knowledge so that he can best utilize his optic blasts, knowing exactly how and when to fire them, and with how much intensity in order to achieve whatever the fight calls for. So whether it's a giant full frontal blast or something a little bit more subtle, Cyclops is always prepared for each and every occasion, as long as he has his trig knowledge intact and his visor and his gloves with him. Since the character first debuted, his powers and their immense strength are something that have also been shown as bothering and plaguing this character, with him even believing that Jean could actually never love him because of his uncontrollable optic blasts. How could she ever love me? I have to wear rose quartz glasses all the time. It's not that big of a deal, psych. Just chill. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that like button? Number 9. Starfire. Starfire is a character who is immensely powerful, and honestly, we don't talk about her enough on this channel. It's been a minute since we talked about Corey, but let's get into it. The Teen Titans in general are an immensely powerful team, and now that they're no longer teens and are fully grown adults, being known simply as the Titans, they're even more powerful than they once were. Being in control of superpowers as an adult superhero is really, I think, all about knowing when to hold back. Over time, characters have a tendency to only get more powerful and more experienced with age, and Starfire is no exception. In the comics, even pre-Flashpoint Starfire in a fight against Blackfire acknowledges that she is indeed her sister's equal in terms of her power and prowess, saying that the only reason that she has not beaten her sister is because they have never fought as equals, despite being equal to one another. And her sister responds by saying that due to Starfire's caring nature, Corey often holds back, which is basically her weakness. At least, that's how Blackfire sees it. While Blackfire might see this as a weakness, I'm sure Starfire would actually see it as a strength, as it is also what makes her a hero. Sometimes in order to be a hero, you have to know when to restrain yourself, you know what I mean? Number 8. Gentle. Gentle is such a great mutant hero, one we honestly do not talk enough about. His power is so great that it's believed using it could actually result in him losing his life. As a result, Gentle was given vibranium tattoos, which allow him to better contain and control his powers. His powers grant him augmented strength. Despite his mutant name, Gentle can actually become insanely muscular, increasing in size and mass, and we don't actually know the limits of his powers yet, which is why they're also so dangerous. Using them is also really hard on Nesno's body, which could result in his death. Gentle is a hero who, while also a citizen of Krakoa now, is also known for his Wakandan heritage, being actually part Wakandan and part Russian based on his parents' heritage. Initially, it was believed that using his power also caused him great pain and actually resulted in seizures, but we later learned that this was actually more psychological. The vibranium tattoos were therefore helpful for him in regards to using his powers, but were also helpful in the way that they seemed to help lessen his pain. Gentle was also recently a candidate for the X-Men, and one of the mutants you could vote to have elected to the team. He didn't get chosen, but I honestly hope he does get to join the main team in the future, as he's a really neat and unique hero and character. Number 7. The Flash. The Flash might seem like a weird pick for this list, especially as up to this point we've mostly been focusing on characters who have something physical or mental that forces them to hold back their power set. But with the Flash, it's actually all about how powerful he is. He is, I would say, too powerful, which is the issue, especially in regards to his ability to time travel. While Barry Allen as the Flash has traveled back in time and changed things only to learn afterwards of how this was kind of an awful mistake, upturning the entire universe as a result of the change he'd made to basically save his mother, Wally West has seemingly learned from his predecessor's mistakes. For that reason, Wally actually prefers not to get involved when it comes to time travel. He knows that to do so could possibly break the universe and so has a tendency to be more reserved and much more careful when it comes to racing through the time stream. And even when his friend Hunter Zolomon had begged Wally to use his power to help reverse his paralysis by traveling back in time to prevent it, Wally actually refused. This is what prompted Hunter to become the villain known as Zoom, believing that Wally simply wouldn't help him because he'd just not known enough tragedy in his life, as Hunter had. Zoom believed that in order to make Wally as the Flash a better hero, he would actually have to make him suffer. Number 6. Hellstrom. Hellstrom is actually someone who is similar to another character on this list in regards to his heritage, although the other character I'm comparing him to here is actually not from Marvel, but stay tuned for more on that. Because this point is all about Damon Hellstrom, or Hellstorm, depending on his persona and his mood. Hellstrom is said to be the son of Satan, although it is unknown up to this point if his father is really the true devil or just one of the many demons posing as the devil in the Marvel Universe, including Damon's father, as well as Azazel, who is Nightcrawler's father, and Mephisto, who isn't really known for being a father, but did once have a son named Blackheart. That is a thing that happened, and Blackheart did try to usurp him, so, you know. Hellstrom, as such, has two different personas within him, one that is inherently more good and heroic, and another that is straight up or on the verge of being evil, more influenced by his father's heritage. Sometimes these two personas are kind of given different names as well, Hellstrom or Hellstorm, depending on which persona he is leaning more towards at the time. Sometimes Hellstrom is actually only spelled with one L, and other times he's used these names to sort of like protect his identity, although they are both super similar, so I don't really fully understand how that's supposed to fool anyone. Hellstrom has often struggled with unleashing the full force of his power, and sometimes, in fact I would say often, regrets its ties to hell and the darkness that lies within him. Number 5. Shazam. Shazam, or Captain Marvel as some still refer to him today, is one of the most powerful heroes DC has, and in fact some would argue that when it comes to his fights and contests with Superman, it is he, not Superman, who is often the one who would need to hold back. This is because Shazam's powers come from the gods, and some actually say this is because his powers are kind of magical. The limitless wisdom of Solomon, the strength of Hercules, stamina of Atlas, power and omnipotence of Zeus, courage of Achilles, and speed of Mercury. There is really no limit, or there shouldn't be, to what he can do, and it is because of this sheer power and strength that Shazam often needs to hold back when fighting against his enemies as well. You could also add in the fact that it is Billy Batson's kind heart that often encourages him to hold back against his enemies, preferring to not be so brutal with his enemies or his opponents. I mean, especially if they are his friends or people he looks up to, because, you know, even heroes sometimes fight each other, like in a fight against Supes. At one point, Superman even played host to Captain Marvel and actually marveled at his sheer power. So, you know you're probably going to need to hold back when you're like wowing Superman with your power levels. Number 4. Blue Marvel. If you are powerful enough to knock out Hulk and live to tell the tale, even if he possibly is maybe a less stronger version of the Hulk from the Ultimate Universe, then you probably need to rein in your powers almost all the time. Blue Marvel's powers come from him being a scientist and being forever changed by an experiment gone wrong. Adam Brashear was the project lead on an experimental attempt to manipulate and utilize antimatter. When the negative reactor exploded, it transformed Adam into, in essence, what he was trying to create. He became an antimatter reactor, harnessing antimatter, which basically powered his amazing newfound abilities. Number 3. Superman. I mean, Superman is one of the strongest superheroes DC has to offer. He packs a mean punch, and I mean a mean punch. He often holds back, and not just in regards to strength and holding back actual force, but also in terms of his morality. Superman has a very strong moral code. He won't even hit someone in the back if their back is turned to him. That's how passionate he is about fighting fair. He doesn't hit his opponents when they're down, and he doesn't kill, even though he could very easily permanently defeat his opponents by just straight up ending them. This just isn't Superman's style, and honestly, it's what most people love and respect about Superman. To use his power to annihilate his opponents would actually kind of be sinking to their level. In fact, in realities where he has chosen not to hold back, like Injustice, where he brutally murders the Joker in response to him destroying Metropolis, killing his BFF Jimmy Olsen, and manipulating Superman into killing Lois, Clark becomes a straight up villain and a brutal dictator, which is why he chooses to hold back more often than not in the comics, because he is aware of how power can easily easily corrupt people. I mean, to be honest, a lot of his villains are people who allow themselves to become corrupted by great power, whether or not they're aware of that. Number 2. Hulk. To say that the Hulk is the strongest there is really not an overstatement. Not only the strongest, but also just one of the most indestructible heroes out there. After all, Hulk is also now immortal, and kinda has been the whole time. And as a result of this, is a character that you do not want to face in a fight. The good news is that Hulk typically doesn't want to kill people, and so he generally does hold back in fights, unless he's going up against someone, that's just about as indestructible as he is. Like, he might not hold back as much when he's fighting someone like the Thing. There are a few reasons that this happens when it comes to Hulk holding back. One, Hulk has actually exhibited he himself has morals. Not all Hulk personas are like this. I mean, look at his alternate version, Maestro, from the future. This version of the Hulk is more devoid of morals and is therefore willing to use all of his strength and power to devastating degrees. The other reason Hulk is often holding back actually has to do with the other persona that's in there with him at the time, Bruce Banner. It's been alluded to before that Bruce can act at times like the Hulk's conscience, but then again, it's also been suggested that Hulk actually might be Bruce's conscience, so kinda depends on the story you're reading as to who is the more heroic between those two personas. Number 1. Raven. Raven is another character that basically sums up the idea of a person who has to hold back and really has no choice in that matter. I mean, we've seen what happens when Raven fully lets go, and it's deadly. Raven in general has to hold back her power in regards to letting herself be fueled by emotion, which is why she generally remains extremely detached. Which also makes her a great counterbalance to someone like Starfire on the Teen Titans team. While Starfire's issue when it comes to holding back is that she has too much emotion, too much empathy for those around her, Raven often prefers to stay closed off from those emotions, knowing that with them could come great power, but at the risk of easily losing control. This is a huge issue for Raven considering her heritage. Raven is related to the demon Trigon, who is immensely powerful and is a version of Satan in essence in the DC universe. While Trigon is her father, he is also her arch nemesis, which means she has to be careful when it comes to possibly opening herself up to his influence at all, as it can and has in the past turned Raven into an extremely dangerous and powerful supervillain. One that could literally end worlds, so yeah. Number 10. Dr. Fate. So here's the thing with Dr. Fate. Typically the character is not just one character, but two inhabiting one body. This is what the Helm of Fate actually represents, the connection of Dr. Fate to Naboo, the Lord of Order, which is where Kent Nelson originally got his powers and his knowledge from. Of course, Kent Nelson also has power separate from his appearance as Dr. Fate. He is after all a supremely skilled and knowledgeable magic user in his own right, thanks to years of training. However, with Dr. Fate really in essence being kinda two people combined, the Lord of Order Naboo and Naboo's host, in this case we're talking about Kent Nelson, these two do not always agree on how best to deal with an enemy or potentially catastrophic events. Case and point in Justice League Dark when Naboo takes control of Kent's body against his will, only for him to later be freed of Naboo's influence and refuse to basically use the power of the helm, instead choosing to keep Naboo trapped within it, because Kent knows, well, if I try to work with Naboo, I'm probably gonna get possessed again. This guy's kinda being a little evil right now. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that subscribe? I know there are many of you that are not subscribed, so do it. Click the button. Do it. Number 9. Cyborg. In the Doom Patrol series, we literally saw just how powerful Cyborg is when it comes to using him as a pawn and manipulating him into attacking his own father. Mr. Nobody managed to trick Cyborg and ended up showing just how much potential he has when it comes to his ability to do harm. Cyborg actually would make probably a pretty great villain, to be honest, which is creepy. Cyborg in general usually has to be careful when fighting against enemies because he is super strong. In the comics and other media, he has also been portrayed as being in essence a master hacker, and as a result constantly decides to hold back rather than, just use his hacking skills to manipulate the world, which would kind of be, and sometimes that would be a little insidious. In the Snyder Cut, it's even alluded to that Cyborg is actually one of the most powerful people in the Justice League, with him being able to control all the banks and bank accounts of the world if he wanted. That's just part of what we get to see. Here he is shown as pretty much having access to everything technological, but being someone who chooses to use this power reluctantly and responsibly, because he is a hero. Honestly, when it comes to powerhouses in the comics who are capable of doing more, but choose to hold back, knowing that unleashing the full force of their power could be pretty dangerous, Cyborg is actually one of the best examples, even though some might not fully comprehend or accept him as the powerhouse he is. But Vic definitely deserves that. Number 8. Sunspot. Sunspot is one of my favorite heroes when it comes to those who have to hold their power back. I mean, at one point, his power was at risk of killing him, guys. After being shot in the head, he was forced to wear a headband to help regulate his powers, as he lost control of them, somewhat, and left unchecked, they could easily kill him. Sunspot's headband would regulate his powers, thereby protecting Roberto da Costa from being burned up from the inside out by literally holding back and balancing his powers for him. And we see just how necessary this is when Bobby, who at the time was known as Citizen V, decides to throw caution to the wind, removing his regulator headband to prove that he is indeed one of the most powerful mutants to have ever existed, while also obviously fighting to save the world by using his power to keep the world engine running, putting his life on the line. Number 7. Sentry. EJ Graham in the comments for the part 1 of this video was considering suggesting Sentry for a potential part 2. Ultimately though, he decided against suggesting that perhaps Sentry doesn't hold back, and instead often simply gets written out of Marvel Comics because he's too overpowered. I would argue that him both being written out / killed off because he's too powerful, and him having to hold back because he is too powerful, are actually both true. Sentry does every now and then go in guns a-blazing, with him ripping people in half kind of becoming a weird, every so often semi-regular occurrence. However, I will also say that more often than not, we've actually seen Sentry hold back his powers and express restraint, especially when you consider he agreed to wipe his own mind and the minds of everyone else on Earth of his superheroic existence just to protect them from the evil villain, the Void, who is basically Sentry's villainous alter ego he was made to believe that he'd always had after being brainwashed by Mastermind. Number 6. Wonder Woman. We have seen what happens when Wonder Woman stops holding back, and it's not pretty, I'm gonna tell you that. Whether we are talking about emotionally with her giving into a well of despair, or physically with her causing the mass destruction of the entire planet as a result of a fight against Superman. In Tales from the Dark Multiverse, War of the Gods, her giving in emotionally resulted in her being overtaken by Hecate, who she had previously trapped in her subconscious, initially preventing Hecate from possessing her. However, after the destruction of Themyscira and the death of her sisters, her fellow Amazons, and her mother, Diana ends up losing hope, and thereby loses control over herself. In Wonder Woman Dead Earth, we learn of how Wonder Woman giving into her rage and removing her bracelets, which in this story hold back Diana's power, results in the destruction of the planet. Even in the main continuity, it's actually been suggested that Diana is much more powerful than she lets on, and this is likely because without holding back, she could actually cause major damage and destruction to the world around her and people in it. Number 5. Storm. Storm has demonstrated restraint on multiple occasions when facing her enemies, and has proven time and time again how much of a badass she is in the comics. Recently, during the AXE Judgment Day event, Storm was one of the few people to survive Uranus' initial attack on planet Arakko, formerly known as Mars. This went down when Storm was the acting regent of Arakko, the planet and nation's leader. Storm is the only person I believe to have actually sat on both the Great Ring of Arakko and the Quiet Council of Krakoa at the same time, and she made this work for actually a pretty good while. In order to get her seat, she actually had to defeat the previous regent who held the seat of All Around Us, that's the name of the seat that she holds, Nameless, the shapeshifter queen. While Storm bested Nameless, she refused to kill her opponent, preferring to hold back and allow Nameless to live, forcing Nameless to actually curse Storm and choose to take their own life rather than simply admitting defeat. Number 4. Black Bolt. Black Bolt is a character who is so powerful, half the time just the threat of him using his power is enough to stop those who oppose him from basically messing with him. Black Bolt's power first manifested at birth, as his mother and father exposed him to Terrigenesis before he was even born as part of an experiment to see, kind of what that would do. This, along with his immensely powerful genetic makeup, resulted in him being born as one of the most powerful Inhumans ever. Black Bolt would end up being kept in isolation for most of his childhood and early life as a result of the sheer power that he possessed. He literally couldn't even just run around and be a kid. No, too powerful. His powers are related to the speech center of his his brain and his ability to harness electrons. Using both, he possesses an extremely powerful voice, with just a whisper often being enough to harm those who stand against him. As it stands, Black Bolt usually communicates telepathically, although not psionic himself, or more often with his own specific form of sign language. Number 3. Icon. Icon has been shown to be even more powerful than Superman on occasion, with Superman at one point remarking that being hit by Icon was the hardest that he'd ever been hit. The two have fought multiple times against one another in the comics, even way back when Clark had his long hair. Oh, I miss his long, luscious locks. At one point they end up fighting in the 2006 Justice League of America series in issue 28, but here it's all a show. So there's no real victor since they are kind of just pretending to fight here. And we have to expect that Icon was holding back somewhat here. Sure, he wanted to make the fight appear convincing, but he didn't actually intend to hurt Superman, which implies that he wasn't even using his full force here, as he likely wouldn't need to go hard to sell a fight to onlookers. With that reasoning, not only have we literally seen Icon hold back, but it also means that the hero, now from DC's Milestone imprint, might actually have to hold back even more than some of the most powerful heroes from DC's mainline, which is pretty wild to consider. Number 2. Magik. Magik is a hero that often gets left out of lists like this, so I want to thank Michael Sheehan in the comments from our part 1 video for suggesting that I add her to this video. Truly, she is a superhero who constantly has to hold back, lest she threaten the existence of the world and possibly the universe. Magik isn't just a straight up hero, she's complicated. She also has a darker side known as Darkchild that she often has to keep contained. And that's what I love about her complexity. She also has a ton of trauma in her life that she constantly has to confront and deal with. Number 1. Dr. Manhattan. Dr. Manhattan has to be one of the ultimate heroes for needing to hold back. Dr. Manhattan is insanely powerful, and perhaps this is why he generally prefers to stay out of the affairs of mortal beings. Well, that and the fact that he likely doesn't much care for, humans. He is a reality warper, and in fact is one of the folks, I would argue, in current lore the main folk, responsible for the New 52 continuity reset. As such, Dr. Manhattan constantly holds back, despite the fact that he could reset the universe on the daily, destroy it, or completely fix everything. Instead of doing any of this stuff though, he prefers to take more of a watcher role, only getting involved when he really feels it's necessary or has some strong desire to do so, which isn't very often.
Number 10. Daredevil. When Matt Murdock was a child, he was hit by a truck that was carrying toxic radioactive isotopes. He got some gunk in his eyes, and as a result, he was blinded. But this being Marvel Comics, the radiation heightened his other senses to the point that he was given his trademark radar sense, which allows him to do sick flips and fight crime as Daredevil. Daredevil is quite a religious fellow who also believes in letting the legal system do its work as much as possible, so he has a pretty strict stance against killing people, believing that the criminals he fights should be taken to prison and left alive. This has put him at odds with other more lethal characters like the Punisher, who thinks that the only good criminal is a dead criminal. But despite the fact that he is often tempted, Daredevil holds back, using his ninja skills to brutalize and maim, but not to kill. This self-imposed rule has been broken a couple times, such as when he was possessed by a demon, when he was forced to shoot a helicopter pilot who was using a minigun to brutalize Hell's Kitchen, and when he attempted to shoot the Punisher, when Frank had tied him up and taped a gun to his hand. But once again, these are pretty extreme situations where he didn't really have any other options. Number 9. Professor X. Charles Xavier is the leader of the X-Men and the founder of a school for gifted youngsters where he trains young mutants to control their powers so that they don't accidentally destroy buildings on the regular. He is an extremely powerful mutant, being able to read and control people's minds. In theory, he could force anyone to do pretty much anything he wants. Thankfully, Xavier shows a decent amount of restraint with his powers, and usually makes a point of not reading his students' minds without permission, and rarely using them to make people act against their nature. For example, considering that governments in the Marvel Universe are consistently passing anti-mutant legislation, it would be very tempting to control the responsible politicians' minds to force them not to vote for such measures. But he doesn't do stuff like that. Sure, he has a bit of a god complex, and has a history of wiping people's minds when he screws up, or dampening Jean Grey's powers until he feels she's ready for them. But overall, he shows a lot of restraint. Outside the comics, in the X-Men 2 movie, We even see that while using Cerebro, Professor X could kill every mutant or human in existence simply by concentrating. So, yeah, he's holding back. Number 8, Batman. Batman is similar to Daredevil in the regard that he is one of the most gifted martial artists in the world and has extensive knowledge on how to handle any situation. Like Daredevil, he also has a strict moral code that prevents him from killing any of the criminals he faces, despite the fact that he certainly could with ease. For example, in Book 1 of The Dark Knight Returns, Batman is fighting against a group of thugs, and in his inner monologue, we can see him playing out strategies, saying, "There are 7 working defenses from this position. 3 of them disarm with minimal contact. 3 of them kill, and the other hurts." He, of course, chooses the option that hurts. But it is a good example of how, as a master strategist, in any situation, he is aware of how he could kill, but chooses not to. This is due to him not wanting to go down the path of his villains, and having a desire to see criminals reform, often hiring criminals who are let out of prison to work at Wayne Enterprises. So, like Daredevil, he has a strict moral code, but he is better than Daredevil at sticking to it, earning him the higher slot. Number 7, Thor. Thor is literally the god of thunder. He can bring down lightning, he can smash stuff with his hammer, and he is an amazing warrior with centuries of combat experience. In fact, he was so powerful and arrogant that his father, Odin, sent him to Earth in order to temper his power with humility. For those only familiar with movie Thor, in the comics, Odin sent Thor to Earth with no memories of his life as a god, and made him believe that he was a doctor with a bum leg named Donald Blake. As detailed in the character's first appearance in Journey into Mystery number 83, he spent a decade on Earth learning the value of hard work and perseverance as he dealt with his injured leg and set up his own medical practice. After this decade had passed, Odin implanted a message in Thor's subconscious telling him to go to Norway, where he found his hammer and regained his godly identity. I don't know if this is full on holding his power back, but the fact that he went through all of that to learn humility and what it meant to be worthy of his powers shows that Thor is very aware of his powers and the proper way to use them. Number 6, Quake. Daisy Johnson is the daughter of the villain Mr. Hyde and a woman with the Inhuman gene. This resulted in her developing the ability to manipulate vibrations. She can use these for a variety of purposes, like causing earthquakes, hence the name Quake. She can also use these powers on a more micro level, such as when she took on the Omega-level mutant Magneto and managed to vibrate his brain until he fell unconscious in New Avengers number 20. On another occasion, when Wolverine was having one of his famous temper tantrums and attacked Nick Fury, she was able to use her vibration powers to cause his heart to explode. So, she has the power to take on some of the most notoriously dangerous characters in the Marvel Universe. In fact, she is so powerful that she actually needs to be really careful about how she uses her powers. Obviously, earthquakes can cause a huge amount of collateral damage, so she needs to be careful of that. But the best example of these powers left unchecked is from the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. television show, where Glenn Talbot gets Quake's powers in an alternate timeline and uses them to destroy the planet. So, yeah, she needs to be careful. Number 5, Gambit. Remy LeBeau is a powerful and popular member of the X-Men with the ability to tap into an item's potential kinetic energy, making it a dangerous and explosive weapon. He most often uses smaller items like a deck of playing cards, which he will then throw at his enemies. The only real limit on these powers is that he needs to make direct skin contact with whatever item he's charging, hence the cool fingerless gloves. Oh, and also the amount of time it takes him to charge the object, with larger objects taking longer. He also has the ability to hypnotically charm people, making them more likely to do what he wants. Before he was a member of the X-Men, he was a master thief, but found that he was having trouble controlling his powers, causing him to seek out the help of Mr. Sinister, who gave Gambit a surgery, removing part of his brain in order to dampen his powers and make them more manageable. So, while there may be other heroes on this list who are more powerful, none of them took such extreme measures to hold themselves back for the safety of others. Number 4, North Star. "Oh, Andrew, you talk about Alpha Flight on almost every list. Why don't you talk about more popular teams?" Well, I'll tell you, it's because they're awesome. And because I spent a lot of money collecting every appearance of Alpha Flight over the pandemic, including the issue in Volume 2 that features the first appearance of Big Hero 6, which was a real pain in the butt to find. And talking about them in a work video makes that a tax write-off. Plus, it's my list, and you're literally in my home right now, so I'm gonna talk about who I want to talk about. Jean-Paul Beaubier is the fastest mutant in the Marvel Universe, since Quicksilver isn't a mutant anymore. Northstar is capable of reaching incredible speeds when running or flying. He has a twin sister named Aurora, who is also fast and able to fly, but though she has a greater endurance than her brother, he is the faster of the two. In X-Factor Volume 4, Number 7, Northstar and fellow speedster Tommy Shepard are comparing top speeds, and JP reveals that his top speed is 189,299 miles per second, which makes him faster than the speed of light. But he has a very good reason for not reaching his full speed. As he explains to Tommy, that would destroy everything in my path. I could garrote the world in half with one lap if I wished it. It would destroy me physically, not emotionally. I can't breathe at that point because I've created a vacuum and my organs are getting crushed, my bones pulverized into dust. So yeah, Northstar is holding back for good reason. Number 3, Captain Atom. Captain Atom was originally a Charlton Comics character, the same way that Shazam used to be. DC Comics eventually purchased Charlton's collection of heroes, and as a result, he was introduced into the DC universe. In the DC retelling of his origin, Nathaniel Atom was a man sentenced to death for treason. He was offered the opportunity to instead sign up for an experiment designed to test the structural integrity of an alien metal. To test this, they placed Atom in a metal egg and then blasted it with a nuclear explosion. He was vaporized, but much like the Watchmen character he inspired, Dr. Manhattan, he was reconstituted with the metal now covering his skin. Captain Atom can tap into the quantum field and convert the energy into powerful blasts. He can also generate and manipulate matter, such as when he transformed Green Arrow's arrows into butterflies. Captain Atom has to be very careful with his powers, as he is essentially a walking nuke. When he uses his upper power levels, he will start to leak radiation, and if his metal skin is ruptured, he risks detonating like an atomic bomb and destroying whatever city he's in. Number 2, Scarlet Witch. So, Scarlet Witch is one of the most crazy powerful people in the Marvel Universe. One time, she was able to rewrite reality so that mutants were the dominant species on the planet and humans the minority. When Magneto ticked her off, she decided to rewrite reality again, taking away something like 99% of the world's mutant powers by simply saying, "No more mutants." She could do that again anytime she wants. I really don't think I need to say anything else on the subject. Number 1, Spider-Man. When I was checking out the previous 2 videos that Amanda did on this subject, which you should of course check out because they're great and also not filmed in an apartment, but I was shocked to learn that Spider-Man didn't make the cut on either installment. So even though he may not be holding back as much as some of the others on this list, I decided to give him the top spot here. Spider-Man is a powerful hero, being able to climb walls, swing from webs, and use his spider sense to avoid danger. But what we're talking about here is his super strength. He can lift several tons at once, as he infamously did in Amazing Spider-Man number 33, when Dr. Octopus trapped him under loads of heavy machinery. But when you have that level of strength, and also have a rule against killing, you have to make sure you pull your punches to avoid taking someone's head off. This was discovered by Doc Ock when he took over Spider-Man's body and became the superior Spider-Man. In one of his first adventures as the new Spidey, Ock fought the Scorpion, and when he punched the Scorpion in the jaw flew clean off. As Doc put it, "Never knew this body held so much power." All these years, Parker must have been holding back. That really must have made him rethink every time Spider-Man punched him and how that could have turned out.
Number 10, the Spectre. This spirit of vengeance in the DC universe first appeared in More Fun Comics number 52. He was originally a demon named Aztar who was helping Lucifer to try and take control of heaven. He eventually had a change of heart and surrendered to the Archangel Michael. As a means of atonement, his memory and consciousness were wiped and he was transformed into the Spectre. He is a divinely powered being capable of almost anything he can imagine. He can travel between dimensions and can shoot energy blasts, is immortal and capable of flight, intangibility, possession, telepathy, and telekinesis, just to name a few of his powers. In order to temper this power, he must be bonded to a human host, with his most often host being Jim Corrigan. Spectre has no limit to his power, but is bound by the morality of his host, who often prevents him from unleashing the full wrath of God upon his enemies. Number 9, Green Lantern. The Green Lantern Corps are a group of intergalactic space cops who are led by a group of aliens known as the Guardians of the Universe. They have used the green power of will to create a central power battery on the planet Oa, and to create power rings which recruit members to the Corps and allow them to protect their sectors by creating constructs of anything the wearer can imagine. One of the most powerful and famous Green Lanterns is Hal Jordan, who has created a lot of amazing constructs over the years. When his home, Coast City, was destroyed, Hal showed just how powerful the Green Lantern ring really was by using it to create constructs of the destroyed city and everyone in it for him to interact with when he mourned. However, when he did this, he was breaking the rules established by the Guardians, who forbid the use of the ring for personal gain. The Guardians immediately told him to report to Oa for disciplinary action, but Hal went nuts and went to war with the Green Lanterns. However, it is still a good example of how the power ring is potentially unlimited, but using its full power in an undesignated way can result in the ring being taken away by the Guardians, which I think makes this point apply to all of the various members of the Green Lantern Corps. Number 8, Hyperion. Marcus Milton was sent to Earth 13,034 as a baby from a dying world of Eternals, where he was raised by a human father who taught him the morals of society. When he grew up, he became the superhero known as Hyperion and joined the super team Squadron Supreme. When his universe and another were colliding, Hyperion tried to prevent his universe's destruction, but failed and was left floating in nothingness until AIM scientists on Earth 616 pulled him into their reality and took him prisoner. He was eventually freed by the Avengers, who he then joined. Hyperion is a ripoff of Superman, whose powers come from the sun. As such, he has a very similar power set, being nearly invulnerable, having super strength, speed, stamina, and the ability to fly and shoot atomic energy from his eyes. Like Superman, he has to be extremely cautious due to his amazing strength, as he could easily destroy the planet if he lets loose too much. Unlike Superman, he has cut loose in a violent way before, such as when he plucked Atlantis from the sea and threw it to the ground, thus destroying it. But he felt bad later, so it's okay. Number 7, Captain Marvel. Carol Danvers is the half-human, half-Kree warrior who joined the Air Force before joining NASA. She discovered her powers and became a superhero, operating under various different aliases such as Miss Marvel, Binary, and Warbird, before eventually taking up the mantle of her dead love, Captain Marvel. She is an extremely powerful hero who has been a member of the Avengers, an honorary X-Man, a Starjammer, and the leader of the Alpha Flight space program. Captain Marvel has all the classic powers such as super strength, durability, and flight, but also has a few extra ones, such as the ability to shoot photon beams and the ability to transmute matter in order to reshape it into anything she wants. She is yet another example of a hero so powerful that they have to be sure to restrain themselves in order to not accidentally kill everyone on the planet. Number 6, Rogue. Perhaps the most obvious choice for a spot on this list, and one that it's frankly kind of embarrassing none of us thought to put in any of the previous 3 videos on this subject is Rogue. Anna Marie has the mutant power to absorb people's energies through touch, which temporarily grants her their abilities, powers, and memories, and causes her victims to be weakened. She once attacked Carol Danvers, and as a result, permanently ended up with her powers of super strength and flight. She started out as a member of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants before eventually joining the X-Men. Although her powers can be useful in a combat setting, it can really mess with your personal life when you can't touch anyone you care about without hurting them. So, most of the time, Rogue holds back her powers by wearing gloves for the safety of those around her. Number 5. Storm. Aurora Monroe is descended from a long line of African priestesses who all have white hair and the potential to use magic. Her mother was a princess who married an American photojournalist and moved with him to Manhattan, where Storm was born. They moved to Cairo when she was 6 months old, but when she was 5, her parents were killed, leaving her an orphan. She lived as a thief for a while before eventually making her way to Kenya, where her weather-controlling powers made her be worshipped as a goddess. She is connected to Earth's weather patterns, and as a result, her emotions can result in unstable weather. If she gets mad, she could start a tornado, for example. Therefore, she has to be careful to keep her powers in check, lest she accidentally cause a natural disaster. Following the death of Wolverine, Storm had Beast take her into space so she could safely vent her emotions, and she still ended up igniting Earth's atmosphere, causing an aurora borealis effect across the entire planet. Number 4. Ghost Rider. Johnny Blaze is a motorcycle stuntman who, in an effort to save his surrogate father, Crash Simpson, from dying of cancer, made a deal with the demon Mephisto. Mephisto promised to cure Crash's cancer in exchange for Johnny's service. Unfortunately, Crash perished in a stunt gone wrong almost immediately afterwards, and Johnny became Ghost Rider, becoming bound to the spirit of vengeance, Zarathos. When transformed into the Rider, he has super strength, is essentially immune to damage, and can manipulate hellfire. Perhaps most iconic is his penance stare, which causes its victims to experience every bit of pain that they have ever inflicted on other people, resulting in guilt, pain, and trauma. Ghost Rider is extremely powerful, but Zarathos tends to want to go really all out on his quest for vengeance, and Johnny often has to hold him back to prevent him from going too far. Number 3. Iceman. Bobby Drake is a mutant whose powers were first revealed when he was attacked by a group of school bullies and he was forced to freeze their leader into a block of ice. An angry mob showed up at his home planning to execute Bobby, but he was saved by Cyclops and Professor X, and he was invited to join the X-Men. His powers include the ability to become organic ice. He can also generate ice, snow, and cold temperature using the moisture in the air. This is actually more powerful than you might initially think, allowing Bobby to freeze the Earth in Astonishing X-Men Volume 3, number 64. He is an Omega-level mutant who holds back from using the full extent of his powers as he fears that he could be dangerous. Professor X once said that Iceman has the potential to destroy the planet if he's not careful, and for a time, Bobby was known to wear a special power belt which helped him keep his powers under control. Number 2. The Human Torch. When Johnny Storm was exposed to cosmic rays while on a space exploration mission with his sister Sue, Reed Richards, and Ben Grimm, he was transformed into the Human Torch, and the group became Marvel's first family, the Fantastic Four. As the Human Torch, Johnny is capable of controlling ambient heat and transforming into a fiery plasma. He can sculpt and throw flames with his pyrokinesis and is able to fly. Most relevant to this list is his Nova Flame, which happens when the torch reaches his hottest temperature and expels it 900 feet around him at a temperature of 1 million degrees Fahrenheit. This makes him about as hot as a nuclear warhead, and if he did this in a populated area, it could result in several deaths. He has stated that this power has the ability to destroy a small moon. He also has to hold back so that he doesn't burn up the Earth's atmosphere, killing everyone on the planet. Number 1. Supergirl. Kara Zor-El is Superman's cousin. When the planet Krypton was destroyed, Kara's home, Argo City, was spared thanks to the efforts of her father, although due to radiation the city was slowly turning to kryptonite. When the city was deemed past the point of no return, her father pulled a page out of his brother's book and built a rocket, sending Kara to Earth. She became Supergirl, and was placed in an orphanage by Superman as part of her cover, although she was eventually adopted by the Danvers family. Supergirl Supergirl has all of the same powers as Superman, such as flight, super strength, speed, hearing, invulnerability, as well as X-ray and heat vision. As someone with the same powers as Superman, Supergirl has to hold back when she fights villains, or even just interacts with people in general, in order to make sure that she doesn't reduce anyone she comes into contact with into a fine red mist. She is slightly less powerful than her cousin, but there was a period where she became a member of the Red Lantern Corps, giving her both the powers of a Kryptonian and a lantern to try and have to control.
And at number 10, Franklin Richards. Franklin Richards is an Omega level mutant who has depicted vast reality manipulation abilities. He's capable of manipulating matter and energy, projecting energy, creating incredibly detailed pocket universes, and a whole array of psionic abilities. For his age, the kid is wickedly strong, and he's potentially the most powerful being in existence. The reason Franklin Richards doesn't rank higher on our list though is because of his inexperience, which arguably is a factor holding him back, if you're looking at the main 616 version of the character. That being said, looking to his older self from Earth 4280, we know that his vast powers only continue to excel with age. He literally destroys 2 Celestials, then hangs out with Galactus, noting that the two of them will witness the beginning of a new universe together billions of years from now. Meaning, kid is immortal. Moving on to number 9, Iceman. Iceman Bobby Drake is a curious case. For starters, this early initial member of the X-Men had a much more limited range of powers back when he was first introduced. For the most part, it consisted of him being able to turn his body into an ice form and then freeze the air around him in order to make ice constructs. But in the following years, he got a serious power upgrade. Emma Frost would eventually take over his body, real briefly, unlocking a variety of different skills his powers entailed, all ones that Bobby had never pulled off himself, dropping him into Omega level territory. He would ask Emma to train him, but she refused. Overall, he is a case of a character who hasn't really applied himself, which is him holding himself back. He also held himself back because of other insecurities too, including his sexuality, something that was dabbled in more recent comics. Moving on to number 8, Gladiator. Gladiator's potency of abilities is dictated by his levels of confidence. So let's backtrack. Gladiator, aka Clark, first appeared in the comics in X-Men issue 107 from 1977, an analog to Superboy and an homage to Philip Wiley's novel Gladiator, which was written in 1930, and DC Superman was also partially based off of that. Fun fact, Clark is actually a combination of Kal-El and Clark Kent. And his powers? Well, get ready for an impressive list here. He has superhuman strength, speed, stamina, agility, reflexes, and durability. Flight, psionic abilities. He is strong enough to shatter a planet, capable of withstanding heat emitted from the Phoenix Force, has heat vision hotter than a star, and his warp speed flight allows him to move 100 times the speed of light, moving across galaxies before Heimdall could even blink in Mighty Thor issue 15 from 2016. But all of that is moot depending on his confidence levels. His powers decrease or increase based on his confidence and self-esteem, meaning he is technically his own worst enemy. And at number 7, Zatanna. Zatanna is yet another character held back by her confidence levels. The difference between her and Gladiator though is that her lack of self-esteem has actually caused the character to completely depower herself in the past, and plays out as much more of an ongoing struggle in the comics. Zatanna is a magical superhero who inherited her gifts from her father, allowing her to not only cast spells but manipulate magic as well. If her self-confidence is weakened, her abilities become hindered. In the past, due to a series of mistakes that she had made, she became completely powerless for a time. And at 6, Captain Atom. Captain Atom is a case of a hero who is already quite powerful but is limited by his own fears that if he were to fulfill his full potential, he may lose his humanity. Talking Dr. Manhattan style here. So Captain Atom, in theory, has no limit to his powers. His abilities come from his atoms continuously splitting and reforming, which gives him an infinite amount of power, limited only by his willpower and his imagination. He can manipulate energy, is self-sustaining, has super strength that matches that of Superman's, and can travel faster than the speed of sound. If he absorbs too much energy at once though, he can be transported through time uncontrollably. Now his power source is linked to something called the strong nuclear force, which binds protons to the nucleus. His atoms can lose coherence if he uses too much power in a short space of time, but it is speculated that he'll be able to overcome this at some point, meaning only his own willpower to retain his humanity is what prevents him from further excelling. And at number 5, Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange generally has a very strong sense of what is right and what is wrong, and what he should meddle with and what he shouldn't. Often he finds himself practicing restraint in situations he'd dominate and solve much quicker if he were to intervene. Case in point, Civil War. The Watcher commented that Strange could have ended the conflict with a mere thought, implying that the Sorcerer Supreme has a whole lot more power than he's letting on. Instead, Strange went off to meditate in seclusion, letting Cap and Iron Man duke it out. There have also been times when Strange's hand was forced and he called upon powerful dark magic, like when he battled the Hulk post-Civil War, which caused him to lose the title of Sorcerer Supreme briefly. It just goes to show that Strange has the best interests of the Earth at heart, unwilling to use riskier and deadlier forms of magic he has at his disposal in order to get what needs to be done. In at number 4, Dr. Fate. Dr. Fate is not just one individual. The character who first debuted in More Fun Comics issue 55 back in 1940 is a long line of sorcerers, each who had come upon Nabu the Wise, a god who granted them their power along with the Helmet of Fate, a mystical artifact that transforms its host into a powerful master of magic. Those donning the Dr. Fate mantle are capable of spellcasting, flight, telekinesis, telepathy, pyrokinesis, superhuman strength, invulnerability, and lightning manipulation. But here's the kicker. Nabu calls the shots, to an extent. If Nabu doesn't agree with what the iteration of Fate is doing, Fate's powers can be limited. In the initial Dr. Fate's case, Ken Nelson, if he was separated from the helm, he is significantly weakened but not entirely depowered, which is another thing. That aside, if Dr. Fate were to go full-blown homicidal or use his near-limitless sorcery powers to wreak havoc, there's a good chance that Nabu would prevent him from causing too much damage. Up next at 3, Havoc. Havoc is Cyclops' brother, a mutant with cosmic energy absorption and plasma discharge abilities. The waves of plasma energy can emanate from his body in all directions unless he channels it purposefully in a single direction. Generally, he wears a special containment suit, often with an indicator on his chest depicting how much cosmic radiation he has absorbed, and how much he has left within his cells. The concentration that's required of Havoc in releasing his energy in focused beams can be exhausting, especially over an extended period. And that's exactly why he's on this list. If he weren't focusing and allowing his plasmic energy just to shoot out of his body without a direction, his impact would be much more destructive. His plasma wave discharges can superheat and disintegrate objects or beings. So really, it is for the best that he holds back and concentrates so no one accidentally ends up dead. And at number 2, Professor X. Professor Charles Xavier is one of the most noble characters in Marvel's roster. First appearing in the X-Men issue 1 in 1963, this exceptionally powerful telepath is one of the most powerful psychics in the Marvel Universe. He has often sacrificed his own desires for the betterment of mutant kind, constantly striving for the greater good by promising a peaceful coexistence between mutants and humans. But there have been a good number of times where Xavier's more repressed, darker emotions have been released from him, causing devastating effects. Specifically in 1996, the sentient psionic entity Onslaught was created from the merging of a darker aspect of Xavier and Magneto's consciousness. During a battle between the X-Men and Magneto and his acolytes, Xavier used his telepathic abilities to shut down Magneto's mind, making him catatonic. The darkest aspect of Magneto's mind emerged and escaped into Xavier's subconscious, taking hold of Xavier's repressed darker nature until it grew into a persona of its own. And finally, at number 1, Sentry. Sentry, aka Robert Reynolds, has a slew of abilities that makes him one of the most powerful characters in Marvel's universe. Or multiverse rather. This includes superhuman strength, speed and stamina, a regenerative healing ability, molecular manipulation, matter manipulation, he's invulnerable, telepathic, can bend time, shapeshift, can become invisible, can astral project, and of course he is immortal. And there's more too that we've listed a zillion times on this channel. While the source of his powers has changed over the years, initially he got his abilities from a super soldier-esque serum that moves his molecules an instant ahead of the current timeline. But here's the kicker. Because of his powers, he's got an entity within him that's a dark side effect. The eroded humanity within Sentry known as the Void, who has his own set of dark powers that include infinity tendrils that attack a victim's mind, impaling them with traumatic visions of the past, present, and future. But now we come to his restriction. In order to prevent the Void from causing catastrophic damage, Sentry worked with Dr. Doom and Reed Richards to wipe out not only his own memory, but the memory of the hero and his evil half from the entire Marvel Universe as a means of protecting it. Those are some real drastic measures.
Number 10. Booster Gold. Firstly, Booster's powers are tech-based, yes, but they still count. Michael Carter, aka Booster Gold, first appeared in Booster Gold number 1 back in 1986, and has changed a lot since his first appearance, though in adaptation form he is often stuck in that mode that he first appeared in. Booster is just an average person in the 25th century living in Gotham, down on his luck after he had been caught throwing football games. He ended up in disgrace and was working at a museum as a night watchman, and with the help of the security robot Skeets, he stole a bunch of tech and combined it to create his costume and went back in time pretending to be a hero from the future. At first he was really only interested in the fame and the merchandising. So much merchandising. But over time, he transitioned into a real hero, and is sometimes quite crippled by the weight of the power he holds, particularly time travel. Booster can go and change pretty much anything, but there will be ramifications. Possibly one of the saddest time travel Booster stories is when he went back in time to save his best friend, the second Blue Beetle, Ted Cord, from being killed by Maxwell Lord. However, this messed up the timeline, but he was willing to live with it, just so that he could have his friend back. But when the Blue Beetle found out, he couldn't let him be so selfish, and voluntarily went back to take his place in the timeline. Booster has to keep his selfish nature in check when it comes to time travel, and for the most part he does. Uses it pretty responsibly, but it weighs on him. Holding back can be a burden, but it's part of what makes one a true hero. Number 9. Black Bolt. Time to get real obvious. Black Bolt first debuted in Fantastic Four number 45 back in 1965, and is a core member of the Inhumans, royalty. He can't speak. I mean, he can, but he shouldn't. His speech center in his brain is different. It produces an unknown particle that interacts with the electrons in his brain, which has caused him to have the most devastating sonic scream out there. Just whispering, he could destroy pretty much anything and anyone. Now, Black Bolt can control and channel his powers a bit with the help of his costume. That top part is a tuning fork, it's not just decoration. But he's hyper aware of this, and so is always very careful. Still, you learn a lot when you can't speak. Black Bolt knows things. And he's a secret weapon when you really need someone stopped. You can convince him to speak, and he only needs to say one thing, and that's it. Number 8. The Scarlet Witch. So her powers have been tweaked and retweaked over time. They're trying to get away from the all-consuming reality warping powers that gave the world House of M and the whole No More Mutants thing. But for a time, and she still kinda does, have to be hyper aware of her powers, because she had a history of triggering them subconsciously based on her own desires, like the saga of her and Vision's children, which has been rendered more complicated in the modern era. Wanda Maximoff first debuted in the X-Men number 4 back in 1964, and has changed a lot since then. Her powers are now in the chaos magic realm, with a mutant element on top, so there's more control, which is good, because the ability to change whatever one wants, that's a lot of a lot. It would and does drive most who hold it mad. Too much power, too much, beyond Omega. Number 7. Cable. Here we're getting into the has to hold back category, or rather had to hold back. He first appeared as Cable in the New Mutants number 87 back in 1990. He had been introduced as Nathan Summers in 1986. Back then he was just a baby and not a man out of time. Cable has very powerful telekinetic powers, but initially he had to use them to keep the techno-organic virus he was suffering from spreading to the rest of his body. That used to be the source of his cool metal arm. When he doesn't have to hold back, Cable is a force to be reckoned with. It's that dangerous combination of telepathy and telekinesis, along with a sense of self-righteousness he inherited from his father, Scott Summers, aka Cyclops. Cable has built his own utopian floating city. That was during the Deadpool and Cable team-up. Good times. Cable is one who has fluctuating powers. He has them all. Oh no, they're gone. Oh yay, some of them are back. It just depends which area you're in. Number 6. Liz Sherman. Liz Sherman was first seen in Hellboy Seed of Destruction back in 1994, and is a being of immense power that she does not want and struggles to control. Her holding back is that quest for control and a fear of what happens when she loses it. Liz has pyrokinesis, the fire-starting ability, and oh, what a fire it is. Her powers manifested when she was 10 years old, and because of her strict religious upbringing, she thought they were a punishment from God for her sins. This has caused her to form a very complex relationship with them. It also didn't help that at age 11 she lost control and killed her whole family. To learn to control her powers, she had to learn emotional control, as that is what triggers them. She has to hold back her emotions and keep them on an even keel, all while wrestling with the bitterness her powers have left her with. Not fun. Number 5. The Flash. Any of them, doesn't really matter which. They're always holding back. Their natural speed is now fast. It's not the normal speed that the rest of us are moving at. They're just constantly moving through molasses to make us feel comfortable. Cause if not, it'd be like the Reverse Flash, how he just lets himself vibrate, which is terrifying. Just slightly out of phase. Always kind of crackling, red eyes. But the Flashes don't do that, because they're nice people. Still, there is a sadness to it, and it makes their good cheer more impressive. To always be being a bit out of step, having to be patient always as the people around you move as fast as they can, but it'll never be fast enough for you. It could leave you feeling disconnected, and again, the time travel possibilities of not holding back. Barry Allen created the New 52 reboot because of his meddling, even though the Doomsday crossover was trying to make that Dr. Manhattan's fault, but it took too long to come out. Art delays. We're only on issue 10. It's been years. Number 4. The Spectre. The Spectre first debuted in More Fun Comics number 52 back in 1940. Cliff notes. The Spectre is the spirit of vengeance who carries out his missions through human hosts. The first was Jim Corrigan, a police officer who made the mistake of getting engaged in a fictional story, so he was murdered. The last part was the Golden Age. He became an avenging spirit in the Silver Age, and he can be very harsh. He has godlike powers and can, wait for it, manipulate time and space, control all matter, has invulnerability, and limitless strength. So how is he holding back? Well, he's really held back by the morality of his hosts. The Spectre exists in a kind of dual host-like existence. The host is there, they're not fully subsumed, and they can resist some of the Spectre's more cruel impulses. If they want to. Some hosts just go with it. Corrigan is notable for this. Hal Jordan was also a host for the Spectre, and he always fought him. This was after Hal died redeeming himself by blowing up the sun. He was then the Spectre until he was resurrected. Also, he would still go on dates with Carol as the Spectre. It was kind of awful. She could never move on with her life until she did, and then he came back to life. Poor Carol. Actually, no, she's awful to Hal. One day I'll tell you the full story of how she once got mad at Hal because he blew her off to save a dying planet. I mean, what's more important? Ferrous air being attacked or a planet breaking apart like Krypton? Number 3. Gambit. Gambit is a lot more powerful than people think. He first debuted in Uncanny X-Men Annual number 14 back in 1990. His powers work by converting the potential energy stored in an inanimate object into pure light kinetic energy, and he has a lot of potential to harness energy also. He also has hypnotic charm. In an alternate storyline, when his full potential was reached, he became New Sun. In this state, he could control all aspects of kinetic energy down to the molecular level, so he can manipulate the potency of energy, which yes, was as terrifying as it sounds. He could then simulate pretty much any type of energy, and of course time travel and cross dimensions in space, and just remake things to his will by turning into pure energy and joining the kinetic flow. Thankfully, the Gambit this happened to was an alternate reality one. Main vs. Gambit actually went up against this counterpart and was left less powerful as a result. Also, Gambit can now convert inert materials into toxic substances. It's a good thing Gambit just likes throwing his playing cards, because he could kill us all. Powers on top of powers, with X-Men, sometimes too much. Blame Grant Morrison and secondary mutations, and also the ever-sliding power scale. Number 2. Reed Richards. This is a case of a couple of things. Sometimes he forgets about his abilities because he defeats his enemies more with his intellect and inventions. Another way he's holding back is that he could be a lot more devilish than he is in terms of proactively destroying threats, but the only thing holding him back is what Sue would think. We've seen this a few times. There was a what-if story. What if Sue Storm died in childbirth, and after she dies, Reed just goes off the deep end, murdering their villains, claiming she was the only thing stopping him, but with her gone, what's the point? The sketchy things he also does behind her back. The Council of Reeds when he joined that League of Alternate Universe Reeds, most of which had gauntlets. The whole Illuminati thing. So his family and love, but specifically Sue, is all that's keeping Reed in check. She can't leave him for Namor, and Namor's been trying hard. He even told Reed he was trying, but that she wouldn't leave. The modern Fantastic Four run is trying to pretend Sue and Namor aren't a thing, for some reason. But I'll never forget. Bearded nice guy Reed? We'll see how long that lasts. Number 1. Superman. Hey, obvious, but he deserves it. The Man of Steel is always holding back. The launcher of the golden age of both heroes and comics has seen his powers grow a lot since his creation in 1938. His strength and potential are held in check by his inherent goodness and belief in humanity. When he uses his full potential, we usually end up with a dark Superman. Somebody mentioned it in the comments of part 1, and I was going to mention it anyway, but one of the best examples of this is from the finale of the Justice League Unlimited, when Superman fights Darkseid and gives his famous "I feel like I live in a world of cardboard" speech.
I feel like I live in a world made of cardboard, always taking constant care not to break something, to break someone. Never allowing myself to lose control, even for a moment, or someone could die.
Superman has been holding back since he was a child. At this point, it's a habit, second nature, and thank goodness for that. The world couldn't handle a Superman always using his full power set, no matter how much kryptonite Batman has. Side note, does anyone else remember that story where Bruce helped Clark find and destroy all the kryptonite in the world? I was like, aw, sweet, and also like, that would never happen simultaneously. Number 10. Hal Jordan / Green Lanterns. So the Green Lantern rings function based on the user's willpower. That, and you have to charge them. But the charge is so narratively convenient that you don't need to worry about it too much. So the bearers can use the rings to create constructs, whatever their imaginations can conceive. But there is a built-in restriction, one that is now very present, and that is lethal force is not authorized. One has to break the Lantern code to kill. Hal knows, he killed the whole Corps, and then some. So one can get the ring to kill, but it'll send an alert and the rest of the Corps and the Guardians are going to be down on you. So best to hold back and find another solution to your problems. Talking to you, Hal. Yes, I know he was possessed by Parallax. If one does break the code, you pretty much have a limitless weapon at one's disposal. This concept was played with in Dawnbreaker from Metal Knight, the dark Batman who would use the lantern ring that came to him to kill. This was from the dark multiverse stuff. He became pretty much unstoppable thanks to the strength of his will. You need a lot of focus and drive to wield a ring, so it's important to hold back on those murderous impulses. Number 9. Jaime Reyes, the Blue Beetle, the third one. More space and alien artifacts. Jaime Reyes first debuted as the Blue Beetle in Infinite Crisis number 5 back in 2006, but he had appeared as a character 2 issues prior. The story of the third Blue Beetle is a great legacy story. So the first Blue Beetle was Dan Garrett, and Cliff notes he found a mystical scarab that allowed him to fight crime. It was a retcon, initially he was powerless. This was at the very start of the Golden Age. Fast forward, he passed it on to his protege, the second Blue Beetle, Ted Cord, who was never able to get it to work. So instead he became a tech-based hero along the same theme. During Infinite Crisis, the scarab was reinvigorated and attached itself to Jaime Reyes. He was able to access it, and it formed into a protective suit around him with many capabilities. However, it became clear over time that this wasn't just some tech artifact. It began to talk to Jaime, to attempt to influence his actions, increase the amount of force he used, etc. This is more of an adaptation thing though. It turned out that the scarab was a part of the Reach, an alien force at war with the controllers. Depending upon continuity, the holding back Jaime is doing is of the scarab, making sure it uses appropriate force and doesn't overreact to situations in a desire to protect him. It's a symbiotic relationship, but not one anywhere near as intense as say Eddie Brock and Venom. It is grafted to his spine though. Ouch. Sadly, Rebirth has retconned pretty much all of this in one of the, in my opinion, missteps, and the scarab is magical again. Number 8. One Punch Man. Firstly, all of you stop being mean to Johnny about his pronunciation. It's different phonetic points, different languages. So the dilemma for very underestimated hero One Punch Man is that he is looking for a villain who he doesn't have to hold back against because he just trained so hard. He was so determined to be the very best, like no one ever was. To punch them was his real test, to beat them was his cause. Only well he is the best. He can KO and explode pretty much any villain with one punch. The punch doesn't even need to land, it's so powerful. Won't someone be there so that Saitama doesn't have to hold back? Make his dreams come true. This is a really fun satirical series, and I feel like we also need to start including heroes from My Hero Academia as well. Thoughts and feelings? I'm sure you'll let me know down below. Number 7. Jason Blood. Gone, gone, the form of man. Rise the demon, Etrigan. I hope you like rhymes, because if not, then oh man, Etrigan is gonna be rough for you. So these characters first appear in The Demon #1 back in 1972. The two are bound together, and Jack Kirby, their creator, had no interest in creating them, but did it because DC wanted horror characters, and he was like, okay fine, here's a demon. There have been some changes in origin, but all in all, it's Merlin who binds Jason and Etrigan together, and the struggle has been real ever since. Jason isn't thrilled about being bound to a demon, and often works hard to live his life without summoning Etrigan at all, and is quite annoyed when some of his magical acquaintances, looking at you Constantine, will force him out. This is because there are some situations where Etrigan's strength and powers are required, but Jason is a skilled sorcerer, so he can avoid having to summon Etrigan for a good while if he's really in a snit. Why doesn't he want him? Well, Etrigan is a sadomasochist and has been known to go too far and torment people because he enjoys it. The two eventually find an even keel and come to respect each other. Etrigan has been largely dormant, but there's rumors about Justice League Dark, so maybe we'll see more of Jason Blood soon. It's a great name. Number 6. Jubilee. Okay, Jubilee is not weak, and she never really was. Her powers were always more than fireworks, even if she herself does describe them that way and can use them as such for entertainment, as she did when she first appeared back in the Uncanny X-Men #244 back in 1989. Breathe. Now, where a lot of this she's useless comes from is the 90s animated series, where she would consistently be ineffectual with her attacks just bouncing off of things like Sentinels. However, Jubilee actually has enormous potential. Emma Frost has noted that she has the potential to detonate matter at a subatomic level because her power set is that she generates pyrotechnic energy plasmoids. So in short, she could be a walking nuclear bomb. What's holding her back? Well, mental blocks really. She needs to hold back because, well, she could destroy everything, but she was held back by her inability to conceive of wielding that much power. She was always surprised when she leveled up. It's a good thing Jubilee holds back, because with all these people calling her useless, maybe one day she'll just snap. Number 5. Storm. You all have been asking for Storm since part 1. You have been scandalized that she wasn't on these lists. Well, she's here now. She first appeared in Giant X-Men #1 back in 1975. She was part of the big X-Men relaunch with a new lineup that re-galvanized the books. The X-Men actually didn't do that well in the 60s. It's only retroactively that people went back and appreciated it. Storm is an Omega level mutant, officially now thanks to House of X. When most people think of her, they think, oh, weather control. But it's so much more than making it rain. She can start tempest, earth-shattering storms, and also manipulate weather on a cosmic level, cosmic storms. And also, like Magneto, she can also mess with the electromagnetic current. Storm doesn't use her full potential because if she did, she would destroy the world. She's only limited by the strength and will of her body, but with all of that training, generating a mega earth-ending level storm shouldn't be too difficult. So yeah, Storm holds back because she doesn't want to destroy the Earth. She lives here too. Also, random question. Wolverine in Storm or Black Panther in Storm? Let me know. Number 4, Spider-Man. He's another one that all of you have been clamoring for, and fair is fair, he's a lot more powerful than he appears, or than people give him credit for. Now when people go down the list of Peter's abilities, they often leave super strength down to the bottom, or off entirely. Instead, the attention goes to the wall crawling or the spider sense. But Peter is very strong, and he constantly has to restrain himself from really hurting people, including the villains he's fighting. He can punch Jaws clean off, but he takes with great power comes great responsibility seriously. Don't mess with Spider-Man. Just because he's wiry and doesn't have the bulk, people think, oh, he can't do anything, just puny Parker. Well, that's how you get thrown through a window. Just ask Wolverine. Number 3, the Hulk. How can we keep making these and not talk about Bruce Banner and the Hulk? That's what Bruce has been doing since he became the Hulk. He first appeared in The Incredible Hulk #1 back in 1962. After being bombarded by gamma radiation, when angered or stressed, Bruce Banner transforms into the Hulk, initially a mindless monster. Over time, the Hulk has developed into being his own being, separate from Banner, which has led to even more problems as the two try to reconcile their joint existence. It's gotten even worse than the Immortal Hulk, with poor dead Banner being dragged along by the still living Hulk. So this is a relationship that has changed, but everyone remembers the classic tale of Banner hiding out from the world because any little trigger could set him off and unleash the beast within. A man constantly battling against his own fears, doing nothing but holding back, essentially. Side note, there's one issue where She-Hulk tries to say that her life is worse than his, even though she's a sexy lawyer that everyone likes, or was a sexy lawyer. Recently she fought for her right to be ugly. Keeping up with comics. Number 2, Invincible. Going back to Kirkman's superhero epic following the life and times of Invincible, aka Marcus Grayson, no relation at all to Dick Grayson. Rick Grayson is dead to me. Invincible is the son of Omni-Man and half Viltrumite. He becomes one of the premier defenders of Earth after the betrayal of his father and the reveal that he was bred to be a weapon to conquer the world. He is incredibly strong, and at first he isn't even aware how much. His training with his father was just coming to a close when everything went down. If he doesn't hold back, he'll just beat his enemies into a bloody pulp, and he has on multiple occasions. Just a bloody mess, complete poundage, a level of gore that is heightened by the bright, happy way the books are drawn. Invincible would go on to become the leader of the Viltrumite Empire, so watch out. So far his reign has lasted centuries. Number 1, Raven. You knew she was coming, you were waiting. Raven is a core member of the new Teen Titans, the result of a forceful coupling between the demon Trigon and her mother Angela Roth. She fled in horror about what had happened, and took her daughter to the alternate dimension of Azarath, where she spent her life trying to teach Raven to suppress her emotions and master her control, a difficult task as Raven is also an empath. She hid her parentage from her for a while in hopes that with proper training she would never be able to access the dark emotion-fueled part of herself, but ultimately she failed. When Raven turned 18, she tried to prevent her father from crossing into Azarath. She is locked in battle with her father and the dark aspects of her nature. Raven has let go before, with disastrous results, far worse than ruining Nightwing and Starfire's wedding, which did happen. While she is a healer, she possesses many of her father's powers and traits and can manipulate darkness. Raven must constantly hold her emotions in check and not be overwhelmed by others, or also her father's forces, lest she give him what he wants and enslave the world. Definitely number 1 worthy.
Number 10, the Beast. The blue bouncing beast is more known for his super intellect than his super strength, although really super strength is his real mutant ability. His brute strength, durability, and super dexterity are the powers that he was granted by his mutation. So why do we know him more for his intellect? Beast prefers to stay out of fighting when it can be avoided, and is often recognized as an academic and pacifist. Part of the reason he holds back when he is fighting probably comes back to those beliefs, as well as his fear of his more animal nature. The times that he is held back when it comes to fighting probably has to do with a few events following his transformation into his beast-like form. As you'll recall, he didn't always look as he does. He used to look like an almost completely normal human, and then he was also a grey beast for a while. Soon after he was transformed formed, he was drugged and hunted by Kraven, causing him to resort to a feral-like state. He almost killed Kraven near the end of the story, and later in the comics was manipulated into believing that he'd killed Iron Man. Both events were like a living nightmare for the mostly peaceful Hank. Number 9. Deku. When Deku from My Hero Academia receives his all-for-one quirk from All Might, he is forced to hold back his powers, as using them at full strength would destroy him. The power of All for One basically allows him to store up energy and then release it in one superhuman and often explosive blast. He must train and use the power carefully or risk damaging his entire body. Therefore, he carefully channels the power and controls the percentage of output to avoid injury to himself. And even with reducing it as much as he does and controlling it, his use of the power still causes his hand and fingers, which he channels the power through, to become disfigured. Number 8. Cyclops. The proof is in the pudding with Cyclops, who is forced to hold back his powers simply because he cannot really fully control them. His laser eyes, sorry friends, I'm just kidding, his optic blasts need to be kept in check, or he would just be blowing up stuff left, right, and center. Scott actually has 2 separate ruby quartz visors, one that helps him control his optic blasts and one that he wears when sleeping that completely contains these blasts. And if you don't believe that his powers need to be held back, just look at the evidence. Anytime he loses his visor in the comics or any other media involving the loss of his visor, usually results in him having to close his eyes to protect people. Unless Emma Frost is around to help him have control over this ability, of course. Number 7. Sunspot. Being able to convert solar energy into strength may not seem like it is something that is insanely powerful, but there was a time in the comics that Sunspot almost killed himself while doing this. Yeah, after losing control of his powers as the result of an injury, Roberto was forced to use a regulator headband to help him gain control of his abilities again. He was often depicted wearing the headband in the comics to help him limit the risk of losing control. And when he chose to ditch his regulator band in an attempt to access the full potential of his powers, he was actually warned that this would likely kill him. Fortunately, he managed to survive, but the risk was still very much there. At his full strength, Sunspot was even referred to as the strongest Avenger. Granted, this was Roberto himself talking, who is known for being kind of full of himself, so. Number 6. Wonder Woman. An insanely powerful superhero, Wonder Woman's abilities appear almost limitless. She has super breath, is insanely strong, is somewhat telepathic, can fly, and even sometimes can breathe underwater. Does anyone remember when the comics told us she had gills? Weird. Granted, these abilities are surprisingly not her own really, as they are gifts from the gods. But still, one cannot deny that Wonder Woman is pretty much unstoppable. So what is she holding back? Apparently, the full strength of her powers as a demi-goddess. Yep, the Wonder Woman we see in the comics isn't even all that she could be. It has constantly been established that her bracelets of submission are used to keep her powers in check and prevent her from becoming too OP. Number 5. Jean Grey. Another strong woman who has been classified as one of the strongest telepaths in the world, an Omega level mutant who also has telekinetic abilities. You might be thinking that I'm gonna go down one of my favorite paths here with Jean and talk about Phoenix and Dark Phoenix and self-control in regards to those entities that Jean becomes. You'd be wrong. In fact, Jean had to have the full potential locked away from her from a very young age. When she first came to Professor Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, Professor Xavier actually put up psychic shields in her mind, recognizing she was not yet prepared to handle the full potential of her power, as it could put her and others at risk. Number 4. Quicksilver. What happens when you go even faster than the fastest man on Earth? That is something Quicksilver should never venture to answer, and after the events of No Surrender, I'm sure he learned just that. Quicksilver is an arrogant hero who sometimes plays villain and who normally indulges very much in his powers. The rate at which he can travel allows him to dash across oceans, walk on water, dodge bullets, and even time travel. However, during the Avengers No Surrender event, he traveled too fast, even for himself, and seemed to find out why restraining one's powers can be a good thing. In his own series following the comic book event called Quicksilver No Surrender, he seems to get stuck somewhere between time and space, in some kind of weird Time-Space Limbo. The series itself is beautiful, and you should read it. It also involves a lot of self-reflection on Quicksilver's part, but besides that, it also serves to show us why Quicksilver holding back from traveling beyond the fastest he can is a good idea. Number 3. Rogue. You asked for more Rogue from me, and you got her. Coming in at our number 3 spot, Rogue is a hero who has always wanted to hold back. In fact, she is often portrayed as not even wanting to have her powers at all, even sometimes attempting to seek out a cure. The traumatizing experience of her first kiss with Cody Robbins, resulting in him ending up in a coma, has always kind of caused her to wish that she was different and, didn't have powers. She does her best to control, limit, and hold back her powers, being careful not to make physical contact with loved ones, and even when fighting, to limit the physical contact she does make with enemies. Number 2. Adam Warlock. Cosmic superhero Adam Warlock has been presented as one of the few people in the Marvel Universe strong enough to wield the Infinity Gauntlet. While he was persuaded to dismantle it after being convinced that it was too much power for any one person to control, the fact remains that his time on Earth and in space has allowed him to go on adventures which have ended up granting him an off-the-charts level of powers in the comics. Still, he does not often use all his power. Why? After using all his power to combine 2 timelines to close a fault created by one of the Inhumans' T-bomb explosions, he accidentally brings back a reality where he became Magus. As a result, there is a darkness that dwells within Warlock, and whenever he uses too much of his power, he risks releasing it. So in an attempt to keep Magus at bay, he is often forced to hold back at the risk of turning evil. Number 1. Dr. Manhattan. A hero who is referred to as a god in DC, Dr. Manhattan's powers grant him omnipotence. Because he carries so much power and also knowledge of all things past, present, and possible futures, he often does not take action. In fact, in the events of the Doomsday Clock, he even refers to himself as a man of inaction. He quarantined himself to Mars and typically does not use his powers to their full capabilities. If you don't believe me, just look at the New 52, which exists because of Dr. Manhattan's interference in the Flashpoint event. I mean, if Dr. Manhattan did not hold back his superpowers as often as he does, we'd probably be seeing a lot more DC reboots than we do.